Revenge with Karen.
The first red flag wasn't the smug email. It was the seating chart. After a decade in the same office, with her desk strategically between the server room and the break room so she could intercept both technical fires and vending machine breakdowns, they moved her to a windowless corner next to the new hire's ring light. No warning. Just a passive-aggressive sticky note on her monitor that said, "Excited for your fresh perspective from here." Fresh perspective, as if she'd been staring at the wall for 10 years, instead of holding the whole damn company together with a mess of undocumented automations and early morning triage. Karen didn't cry. She didn't slam a drawer or call anyone a bastard. She just stared at that note for a long time, then moved her desk. Quietly. Same way she'd been running things for years, quietly. She didn't need praise. She needed stability, routine, one decent chair that didn't squeak when she leaned back to reset a cron job or manually force sync a busted API. Instead, she got a new VP with a podcast voice and an obsession with synergy. The kind of guy who called Excel a legacy artifact and thought Slack was too slow for real innovation. Still, Karen gave him a fair shot. Even when he made little comments in meetings like, "We need fresh energy, right, Karen? You've got such great tribal knowledge. Maybe you can help onboard someone with more dynamic instincts." Tribal knowledge, that was a new one, like she was some forgotten village elder holding ancient secrets. Karen didn't correct him. She didn't roll her eyes. She logged the comments, saved the calendar invites, backed up the system logs, and smiled. By the way, if you're still listening and you've made it this far, do me a favor. Tap that subscribe button and give this story a like. It really helps the team keep bringing these wild tales to life. Plus, you never know when your HR nightmare might need a little anonymous storytelling therapy, right? Anyway, back to Karen. She'd spent 10 years earning the kind of trust you don't put on a resume. She didn't have fancy credentials or a LinkedIn banner photo with mountains and ambition quotes. But when payroll got stuck, she fixed it. The order tracking dashboard glitched at 3 a.m. Karen was the one who quietly pushed the patch and reset the whole thing before sunrise. No glory, no drama, just work done right. People forgot she was there because she never dropped a ball. She automated half the invoicing system from scratch after hours and never even put her name on it. She built a back-end report generator that saved the CFO 6 hours a week. The last VP left to explore new ventures after a data breach nearly cost them a major client. Karen stayed late 3 nights in a row and restructured the entire client audit pipeline. Again, no bonus, no promotion. Just a quiet thanks for the hustle email and a holiday gift card to a steakhouse she was too tired to visit. She didn't do it for applause. She did it because the work mattered. Because if she didn't care, no one would. That's how it always was with people like her. The invisible fixers. The ones who stayed calm when everyone else was screaming in the conference room. Then came the first true insult. The new VP, fresh from somewhere coastal with buzzwords in his blood, pulled her into an informal huddle. Just the two of them, smiling too wide. He said, "Karen, you've done incredible things here, but we're really looking toward a new chapter. Someone who can bring a little more fire, little more social capital, you know?" She just nodded. He wasn't done. "We're actually bringing in someone a bit younger to lead the team. It's just time for a fresh approach. No hard feelings, right? No hard feelings." Like he was offering her the last donut in a meeting she wasn't invited to. She looked at the HR rep sitting off to the side, her smile frozen in an expression she probably practiced in a mirror. Severance papers already printed. Like this was just another Tuesday. Karen looked back at the VP, tilted her head slightly, and said, "Thank you for the opportunity." That was it. She stood up, grabbed her water bottle, her external drive, and the little fern on her desk named Wallace. She left the sticky note right where it was. She walked out at noon. The office door clicked softly behind her. No tears, no scene. But inside her tote bag was a flash drive labeled Legacy Configs Do Not Delete. Inside that drive was the entire company's operational nervous system. No backups, no documentation, no one else knew, and she didn't plan to answer her phone. The meeting wasn't on her calendar. No agenda, no prep doc, no subject line, just a 9:30 a.m. invite titled Catch Up. Sent at 9:04. That was the first insult. Karen lived by structure. She didn't believe in chaos meetings. You wanted her time. Scheduled it 3 days ahead and brought bullet points. Not this smiley face emoji crap. Still, she showed up. On time, dignified, even wore her cardigan with the silver buttons, her version of armor. Walked into conference room C, where the air always smelled like burnt Keurig and bad decisions. HR was already seated, blinking too fast, holding a manila folder like it might explode. And there was the VP, leaning back in a swivel chair that probably cost more than her last 3 raises combined. Legs crossed, loafers spotless, flashing that rehearsed tough conversation smile you learn in some corporate empathy workshop taught by people who have never been laid off. Karen, he said, drawing out her name like it was a negotiation. First off, I want to thank you for everything you've done. Truly, 10 years of dedication, and it shows. She nodded, waited. He continued, shifting gears like a bad salesman. We've been looking closely at department structure, and frankly, we're heading into a new phase. More innovation, more agility, a stronger social brand presence. Buzzwords, so many buzzwords you could scrape them off the glass walls like mold. We think it's time to bring in someone with a fresh perspective. Someone who can really lean into a next-gen mindset. A bit younger, more adaptable. Doesn't mean we don't value your work, just means it's time for evolution. Karen blinked once, nothing more. HR chirped in, stumbling. We have a transition package we think is very fair, and of course we'll support you through. Karen held up a hand. Not rude, just definitive. She looked at the VP. His tie had little whales on it. Thank you for the opportunity, she said. The HR rep froze. Sorry, just to clarify, this isn't official yet. We still have some. I'm not contesting it. Karen replied. Calm, you've made your decision. And now I've made mine. She stood, picked up her planner, slipped the manila envelope into her bag like it was a grocery list, walked out of the room like she was heading to lunch. No tears, no raised voice, just absence. That sharp, silent kind that makes you realize someone was holding the whole thing up by sheer willpower, and now they're not. Back at her desk, she unplugged her keyboard, grabbed her mug, faded blue, that I have enough meetings in hell, and took Wallace the fern from his sunlit perch. Her screen still displayed the internal dashboard. Rows of live data, integration logs, vendor sync health, all humming along. For now, she logged out, deleted her Slack profile, wiped her browser cookies, left her keycard in the drawer, not on the desk. She wasn't going to give them the dignity of ceremony, just silence. No goodbyes, no reply all farewell email, no LinkedIn status about closing chapters or excited for what's next. Karen wasn't interested in spin. By noon, she was gone. By 12:07, someone from the marketing team pinged her asking where the Q4 rollout tracker went. Got an error message instead. No answer. Karen didn't go home and collapse. She didn't scream into a pillow or call her sister. She drove straight to her favorite little bakery by the river, ordered an almond croissant and a large black coffee, sat on the patio, and opened a paperback mystery novel. Flipped calmly to chapter 7. Across town, back in the office, a new hire was being shown to her desk. The same one Karen had occupied for a decade. She was already asking where the login credentials were. Why the BI dashboard was throwing a 502 error. Why the vendor sync showed last updated 14 days ago when it was updated daily. Karen smiled and sipped her coffee. She knew exactly what was coming. Karen's house was silent when she got home, the kind of silence that didn't beg to be filled. No TV, no Spotify playlists, just the soft thunk of her shoes hitting the hallway floor, her tote bag sliding off her shoulder like the weight of a decade had finally agreed to let go. She didn't fall apart. She didn't even sigh. She walked straight to the kitchen, opened the cabinet above the fridge. She kept the good wine and uncorked a bottle she'd been saving for someday. Apparently that was today. She poured a glass, not a delicate pour, a full glass of wine kind of pour. Then she walked into her office. The room was small, barely big enough for the desk, 2 monitors, and the corkboard where she pinned system workflows like they were crime scenes. She sat down, opened her laptop, and logged into her personal cloud. There it was, folder labeled, Legacy Configurations Do Not Delete. No one at the office knew it existed. She'd made it after the second time her requests for documentation training were ignored. It held every custom script, batch job, endpoint redirect, and middleware patch she'd quietly built over the years to stop the company's digital infrastructure from eating itself alive. Half of it was duct tape. Elegant duct tape, but duct tape nonetheless. Company's third-party vendor integration. Only worked because she wrote a handshake script in 2018 after the update broke the default API calls. The nightly compliance reports. Her own Python routine triggered by a timestamp, she manually nudged forward each Friday to account for time zone drift. The internal dashboard graphs the execs loved so much, pulled from a Frankenstein Excel macro that fed into a JSON file no one even knew existed. All undocumented, all saved. She copied the folder, dragged it to her encrypted drive, then deleted the original from her laptop with the same finality as brushing lint off her sleeve. Next, she opened Slack. Her name still had a little green dot next to it. Online, available. She clicked her profile. Status, working remotely today. She deleted it, then deactivated her account. Just like that, she disappeared from the map. Back in the kitchen, she took her wine out to the backyard. The late sun was filtering through the old oak tree. She kicked off her shoes and sat down on the steps. Birds chirped. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. Civilization continued. Inside the office, the automations kept running for now. But here's the thing about the way Karen built things. She knew exactly how long they would last without her. She'd done the math. She knew when the scheduled jobs would try to call scripts that no longer had permission, when the system clocks would tick past her last manual override, when the compliance report would fail to generate because the spreadsheet it pulled from hadn't been updated, when the vendor sync would hit a dead-end point and start throwing silent errors. Everything she'd built was just clean enough to run, but not idiot-proof. Not because she wanted to sabotage anything, because she was always told, we don't have the resources for full documentation right now. Fine. They didn't want to invest in understanding how it worked, so she made sure they wouldn't. She took a walk, just a few blocks, familiar trees, same cranky neighbor watering his lawn like he was defending a castle moat. She waved. He nodded. When she came back, she sat on her front porch and checked her phone. Nothing urgent. A couple of "Are you okay?" texts from former coworkers who hadn't dared say anything at the office. One just read, "I can't believe they let you go like that." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. By this time tomorrow, someone was going to realize the order processing queue hadn't updated, that the daily vendor report never got emailed, that the internal audit tools were still using Karen's credentials, which no longer existed. They wouldn't panic immediately. Not yet, not while the lights were still on. But the storm wasn't coming. It was already built. It was in every undocumented script, every silent automation, every system no one else ever bothered to learn. And Karen was on her second glass of wine, watching the sunset, legs tucked under her, feeling something strange creeping in, a feeling she hadn't known in years. Not revenge, not even satisfaction. Just peace. The message came in around 8:47 a.m. Timestamp Karen would later remember, not because it mattered, but because it confirmed how quickly the seams had started splitting. It was from Lacey, the junior analyst she'd half-raised like a stray cat that wandered into IT with a Google Sheet addiction and a caffeine habit strong enough to kill a horse. Lacey wasn't dumb. She was green, sure, but sharp enough to notice when the building started leaning sideways. The message said, "Hey Karen, sorry to bug you. You remember where you documented the vendor API audit script? They're trying to run it and it's just not working. It's saying something about missing keys. Did you leave that somewhere?" Karen read it twice, then locked her phone and set it face down beside her coffee. She didn't respond, not because she was being cruel, but because she was finally being honest. Honest about how much she'd carried, honest about how many times she offered to share the load and was brushed off like lint on a cheap blazer. She opened her file cabinet, bottom drawer, pulled out a folder labeled HR Last Updated 2021. Inside, every performance review, every keep up the great work, sticky notes scrawled by a supervisor who never once sat through a system upgrade. Every time they'd called her a rock star, as if that title paid overtime or fixed broken integrations at 3 a.m. She flipped to the back, her original hiring packet. There it was, highlighted in yellow, employment status, at will. Funny, for someone they could discard at will, they sure hadn't considered what else might walk out the door with her. She leaned back in her chair and stared out the window. Autumn leaves were starting to fall. A crow landed on the fence post and cawed once, loud, sharp, like punctuation. Karen smiled. Then the memories started rolling in, not in dramatic movie flashbacks, just quiet little stabs of clarity. Like the time she'd gone to the then director and said, "Hey, maybe we should start a knowledge base. I could train someone on how the sync jobs work, maybe record a few walkthroughs." And he'd laughed. Laughed. Said Karen, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You're the only one who gets that stuff anyway. Honestly, lucky to have you keeping the wheels turning solo. Solo, that word stuck like a splinter. Another memory, when they cut the contractor budget and she took over the weekend batch processing without a title bump, just so invoices wouldn't lag. Another, when she trained a temp in one afternoon because HR forgot to hire for maternity leave and thought she'd figure it out. She always did. She'd brought all of it up once. During a performance review, she asked, "What's the long-term plan for process documentation?" Her manager said, "We're building that into next year's roadmap." That was 3 years ago. The roadmap was still a vague PowerPoint buried in some shared drive. Meanwhile, Karen had been manually resetting authorization tokens every 90 days for 3 separate vendors because nobody thought to automate it. She didn't mind. Not back then. It gave her control. And control gave her peace. But now that control was gone. Suddenly, the cracks were loud. She walked back to her office, opened her laptop, and pulled up her version history of the audit script they were asking about. She'd updated it 4 times in the last year alone. Once when the vendor changed their endpoint without warning. Once when the encryption keys rotated and no one told IT. Once because she spotted a timing error that could have caused duplicate reports. Once because she felt like it. No documentation, no ticket history, no backup plan. Just her fingers on a keyboard at 11 p.m., sipping tea and fixing things before anyone else knew they were broken. Lacey messaged again. "Sorry to follow up. They're trying to push the audit, but it's locked. Was it linked to your login?" Karen smiled and shut the laptop. Somewhere, in an open plan office full of plants and brittle optimism, the new VP was probably pacing, trying to figure out why the vendor integration was failing. Why the internal compliance system suddenly thought it was blind. They didn't know about the 2-factor triggers she'd embedded, the soft locks, the silent fail-safes, not because she wanted to trap anyone, but because she never trusted anyone to not trip over the system and break it by accident. They treated her like wallpaper. Now, they'd learn what happened when the wallpaper was the structure. Her phone buzzed again. She ignored it. She was too busy doing something she hadn't done in 10 years. Nothing. It started with a vibration. One, then another. Then a buzz so constant it sounded like her phone was having a seizure on the countertop. Karen glanced at the screen, 3:04 p.m. Missed call HR office, missed call operations lead, missed call unknown number, missed call office again, missed call help desk, missed call help desk, missed call help desk. She let it sit there, humming like a trapped wasp. After about 10 missed calls, the phone finally gave up and just flashed 35 missed calls like it was personally offended. She sipped her tea, turned a card over on the board game. "Draw 2, she said to her nephew, who groaned and rolled his eyes before reluctantly picking from the deck. It was their Saturday game, except now it was Tuesday. Karen didn't care. The sun was warm. The birds were chirping. Somewhere across the city, her former office was imploding in real time. It didn't take a genius to guess what was happening. Without her credentials, the vendor integrations would start timing out. The compliance report scripts she'd kept duct-taped together with cron jobs and Grace would fail their nightly runs. The daily sync between shipping orders and tracking codes would break the moment the tokens expired. That's the thing with fragile systems. They don't shatter immediately. Creak, they groan. And then, one minute you're coasting, the next minute you're staring at a 502 error that makes your VP sweat through his dress shirt. She imagined the scene with cinematic clarity. The new hire, the one brought in to bring fresh energy, sitting at her desk in full-blown panic mode, spreadsheets crashing, dashboards blank, vendor response logs throwing back cryptic red text errors like authentication failed and missing permissions. Meanwhile, the VP, "Mr. We need dynamic profiles," is in a glass conference room, waving his arms at it, muttering phrases like technical debt and legacy dependencies to sound like he knows what the hell any of it means. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. In truth, Karen had never built the system to last without her. Not out of spite, just necessity. Every time she'd asked for help, someone to shadow her, someone to document, someone to care, they'd shrugged. Karen's got it, so she got it. All of it, every script, every key rotation, every automated backfill process when the third-party tools flaked out at midnight. They never invested in redundancy. And now they were living the price of that decision. Her phone buzzed again. She flipped it over, face down on the coffee table. Her nephew looked up from his cards. "Aren't you going to answer that?" Karen smiled. Nope, is it work? She shrugged. Not mine anymore. They kept playing. Meanwhile, across town, chaos bloomed. Help desk ticket queue exploded. Someone in marketing tried to manually override the order tracker and ended up deleting a week's worth of updates. The compliance officer realized the regulatory audit tool hadn't sent a report in 36 hours. Legal asked why the sandbox database was full of duplicates. In operations, a junior analyst suggested reaching out to Karen. The VP said, "We don't need her. This is just a temporary glitch." An hour later, he was on his fourth energy drink, pacing in socks because he'd sweat through his loafers. Someone mentioned the phrase vendor breach, and the legal team got looped in. Karen moved her pawn forward 3 spaces. "Ha," her nephew said. "You landed on the lava trap." She pretended to groan. "Well, that's just my luck." He grinned. "Want to quit?" She looked at the cards, the board, the sun filtering through the curtains. "Not a chance," she said. And in that moment, she realized something she hadn't felt in years. The system wasn't her problem anymore. Let them panic. Let them sweat. Let them finally understand what she held together, not with authority or applause, but with quiet, precise care. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and for the first time in 10 years, exhaled without bracing for the crash. Because the crash had already started. And Karen was watching it from the front porch, glass of tea in one hand, lava-trapped pawn in the other, completely, beautifully off the grid. By Wednesday morning, the phrase critical incident was getting thrown around like glitter in a kindergarten art class. The first emergency meeting started at 8:15 a.m., and by 10, they were on their third Zoom call, each one more panicked than the last. Faces flushed, voices raised, coffee mugs clutched like life preservers. Someone in IT finally said it out loud. "We can't file with the regulator unless the compliance script executes. It's hard-coded to Karen's authentication chain." The VP blinked. "Well, can't we just change that?" The compliance officer didn't laugh. He just stared. "You don't change a signature-level encryption protocol by clicking around in Google Docs." She built a system with layered dependencies, some of which were off-book. Off-book, that was the polite way of saying. No one else ever understood what she did, and now they were neck-deep in a swamp of undocumented genius. By 11:30, the operations dashboard was completely down. Order tracking, dead. Status pages, blank. Customer service was getting screamed at by vendors because confirmations weren't syncing. Invoices were repeating. One particularly lucrative client in Utah had called 3 times, asking why their export forms were dated 2022. Meanwhile, the new hire was curled up in an ergonomic chair near tears, whispering, "I don't know what any of this means," while trying to Google her way through scripts that looked like they were written in a hybrid of Latin and sorcery. The third-party logistics vendor, one of the company's most important partners, flat out refused to push updated APIs until they got a callback from the authorized contact listed in their system. That contact, Karen. When the junior analyst, Lacey, bless her brave soul, tried to submit a change request to transfer access, the vendor's security team flagged it and said, "We'll need a voice confirmation and 2-factor reauth from the previous system admin." They didn't have it. Lacey had messaged Karen again the night before. Just a quiet ping. "I know this isn't your mess anymore, but it's getting bad. I'm sorry they treated you like that. Just letting you know what's happening." Karen read it, didn't reply. She wasn't angry, not at Lacey. She'd tried to teach her things, show her where the important logs lived, how to read error stacks like tea leaves. But they never gave her the time or the clearance. And now the panic was a full-blown corporate wildfire. The VP, now visibly sweating through his shirt, stormed into IT demanding to see the backup documentation. You could practically hear the record scratch when the head of infrastructure replied, "Karen never submitted documentation for most of her scripts. Every time we asked, leadership said we didn't need it. So recreate it," the VP barked. "Oh sure," the tech lead said, deadpan. "I'll just reverse engineer 7 years of logic in a few hours." "No problem. Want me to invent time travel while I'm at it?" The VP's next move was both predictable and pathetic. He tried to fake it, pulled up a shared doc, started writing out what he thought the compliance script did based on old emails and a meeting transcript from 2019. Even tried to forge a credential flow to send to the vendor. Didn't work. Karen had built in 2-factor authentication flows that routed through a retired service alias only she had access to. And the kicker? She never gave out the passwords. Not once. Not because she was hoarding power, but because no one ever asked. They assumed she'd always be there, always would be. They thought she was wallpaper, but wallpaper doesn't set up cryptographic fail-safes. By noon, the CEO had been looped in. He wasn't yelling yet, just listening, watching, asking questions the VP couldn't answer. Why was there no documentation plan? Why is the API key audit locked? Who approved this transition? The VP stammered, blamed tech debt, blamed process gaps, blamed Karen. That was his biggest mistake. Because the moment he started talking like Karen had done this to them, instead of for them for 10 years, everyone in the room who'd ever called her for help suddenly remembered the truth. That she'd never once said no, that she'd stayed late, quietly fixed things, took the hits and never asked for credit, never once weaponized her knowledge, until now, and even now she hadn't weaponized anything. She just walked away, and without her, they were realizing what she was, not a cog, not a technician. She was the only reason the whole machine hadn't collapsed years ago. And now it was happening in real time. Because no one thought to ask what she built. No one thought to listen when she offered to explain. And now the only person who could help them wasn't answering the phone. Karen was halfway through organizing her spice rack when the call came through. The number wasn't saved, but she recognized the area code. Downtown corporate tower. 3rd floor, legal department. She let it ring 4 times before answering. Karen speaking. A pause. Then a voice she hadn't heard in years, low, precise, always trying to sound calm even when the floor was shaking beneath them. Hi, Karen. This is Ellie Cohen, corporate counsel. I know this is unexpected, but I was hoping we could talk for a moment. She smiled, not because she was happy, because it was finally him calling. I'm listening. He cleared his throat. We're in a bit of a bind, I gathered, more throat clearing. She could practically hear him rubbing his temples. Look, I won't waste your time. We need your help, just for a few hours. We're not asking you to come back permanently, just help us stabilize the systems. She walked over to her kitchen table, opened her laptop, and casually booted up her private workspace. That's very kind of you to say, she said flatly, clicking through her folders. But I don't work for the company anymore. I understand, and we respect that. But I'm happy to consult, she interrupted, under one condition. He went quiet. My rate starts at $450 an hour, she continued. Prepaid. Minimum engagement, 20 hours. The silence on the other end was thick enough to chew. When he finally spoke, his voice had a new texture, one laced with disbelief and underneath it resignation. That's quite a number, Karen. No, she said. That's a discount. If I were billing you for fixing the negligence of your executive team, I'd charge more. He didn't argue. Email, she gave it, still the same domain, but with a new tail. At Karen Systems Consulting Com, 10 minutes later, her inbox pinged. She opened the message. Attached, a hastily cobbled-together contract template with placeholders still intact. She didn't even read past the subject line. Instead, she opened her own template, professionally designed, precise, with an embedded payment link, and dropped it in a reply. Subject: Consulting Engagement Terms, header, Karen Systems Consulting LLC. Underneath, in crisp font. Scope of work: Critical Systems Recovery Support rate, $450/HR prepaid. Minimum commitment, 20 hours availability. Remote only, retainer due before work begins. She didn't include a resume. Didn't need to. She knew what they knew now. No one else could help them. Not the VP. Not the IT lead. Not the half-panicked help desk flailing around in shared drives, hoping a miracle would crawl out of a PDF. Karen had built the bones of their operation, and they'd amputated her like a molehill on a flat budget line. Now they were hemorrhaging and begging the molehill to save their lives. The phone buzzed again. Illy. Karen, he said, already sounding more careful. I've reviewed the terms. We'll move forward. Payment first. He hesitated. Wire receipt, she added. I'll log in. Until then, good luck. She hung up. 20 minutes later, the payment hit her account. She didn't jump into the work. She didn't race to log in or respond with urgency. Instead, she finished sorting her cinnamon jars, brewed a fresh cup of coffee, opened a clean notepad. Then, and only then, she cracked her knuckles and typed. Session started 1:44 p.m. She clicked through the company's broken dashboard like a surgeon calmly observing a collapsed lung. The graphs were dead. The API links were snarled. Half the error logs were just sad little screams into the void, echoing back, Script not found. Permission denied. Sync timeout. She didn't even flinch. They had no idea how lucky they were that she wasn't mad. Karen didn't do revenge. She did precision. And she was about to teach them the cost of forgetting the difference. Boardroom was cold, both in temperature and mood. It always had been a little too clinical, but today it felt like a morgue with swivel chairs. Half the board sat silent behind their tablets, pretending to skim the updated incident report. The other half just stared at the projector, where the COO stood at the front of the room, clutching a clicker like it might save his soul. We've been entirely dependent on one person for our core operational processes, he said, voice flat, and we let her walk out without a succession plan, documentation, or transitional oversight. Silence. Someone coughed. From the back of the room, a board member finally spoke. How exactly did this situation not flag in any of our quarterly risk assessments? The COO didn't blink, because she was never documented as a strategic risk. HR classified her departure as a standard resignation. No red flags were raised. All eyes turned to the HR director. Her lips parted like she wanted to say Karen was just a systems analyst, but the words died in her throat. Instead, she pulled up the compliance sheet on her screen and started scrolling. Frantically, line by line, she searched for the mandatory key personnel contingency tag, standard protocol for anyone whose removal could threaten day-to-day operations. Karen wasn't listed. No contingency plan. No backup protocol. No retention clause. Nothing. And then came the smoking gun, Karen's final performance review, dated 8 months ago. Under a section titled Process Gaps and Suggested Improvements in clean bullet points, she had outlined everything: lack of documentation, no cross-training protocols, over-reliance on single points of failure. It was all there, every warning, every red flag, ignored. The COO clicked the slide forward. A timeline appeared on screen, Monday to Thursday, color-coded in a gradient of corporate failure. Monday, Karen resigns at noon. Tuesday, order tracking and compliance scripts fail. Wednesday, third-party vendors freeze API delivery. Thursday, retainer paid. Karen logs in. And then in big, bold letters, recovery cost initial estimate, $94,250, projected contract extensions. TBD, brand damage. Irreversible, the CFO took off her glasses. Across the table, one of the directors leaned back and muttered, Jesus. And then the hammer dropped. The VP, the COO continued, voice just a hair colder, is being placed under internal review effective immediately. His modernization initiative resulted in the single greatest systems disruption in the company's history. Not a word from the VP himself. He wasn't even in the room. Word was, he'd been told to take administrative leave earlier that morning, scored it out after trying to run a patch script himself and bricking half of finance's dashboards. Meanwhile, Karen sat in her home office, sweater on, glasses perched low, browsing through broken lines of code with the calm of a librarian sorting overdue books. She said very little during her consulting sessions. The IT manager kept trying to ask questions, trying to build bridges through technical jargon like error propagation and threshold breach. Karen barely looked up. Instead, she opened a document titled Review Memo 2022 Karen PDF, scrolled to a section marked Unaddressed Recommendations, and highlighted 3 lines: Legacy scripts need migration planning. Centralized credentials pose long-term risk. Department lacks succession architecture. She said nothing, just shared her screen, pointed, let the silence do the rest. On the other end of the Zoom call, someone exhaled like they'd just been punched. No drama, no outburst. Just the quiet realization that the woman they'd underestimated had been giving them the answers the whole time, they just hadn't bothered to read them. By the end of the day, her hours were tallied, 8.75 billed, half a dozen systems partially restored, 3 critical warnings marked pending further consultation. She logged out at 6:03 p.m., opened her retainer dashboard. Payment already processed. Memo line, emergency response phase. When she closed her laptop and made tea. Meanwhile, back in the boardroom, someone finally asked, do we even have anyone capable of replacing her? The COO didn't answer, because everyone in that room already knew the truth. There wasn't a replacement. There was just Karen, and they'd lost her. The boardroom was quieter than usual. Not the tense, tap your pen kind of quiet, the stillness that settles in when people finally understand the full depth of their mistake. the kind of silence that happens after the bomb's gone off, after the fire's out, and all that's left is the charred map of what once was. A director leaned forward, fingers interlaced, face unreadable. "How much does she know?" he asked. The company lawyer didn't look up from the folder in his lap. "Everything," he said, "and more." There were no follow-up questions. Karen, meanwhile, was back in her home office, one last screen share open. Her consulting dashboard showed 19.75 hours logged. She could have stretched it out, milked the final 15 minutes with polite humming and a fake loading screen. But she didn't. She clicked her mouse once, scrolled to the bottom of the shared audit log. "This," she said flatly, "is where your compliance cascade started breaking down." No one argued. They couldn't. She moved to the final tab, highlighted a cell, one she'd marked redundant fail-safe key unconfirmed access. Then she dropped her cursor to the comment field and typed, "Next time, document your systems, or at least value the ones who do." No emojis, no passive-aggressive bold font, just that. She clicked save, muted the call, and without a single goodbye, closed the laptop. Done. She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes for a second. The room felt larger than it had 2 weeks ago. Cleaner. Lighter. Phone buzzed once. It was from Lacey. "Just a short message. You were the heart of the whole thing. I'm sorry." Karen didn't tear up. She didn't get sentimental, but she did smile. She typed back, "You'll be fine. Just don't let them forget that next time." She locked her phone, stood up, and walked outside. The air was cool. The sun was low. In a different part of town, the company scrambled to finalize its revised risk report, complete with a new section, Key Systems Dependence and Staff Retention Strategy. Karen's name didn't appear anywhere in it, but her fingerprints were on every policy revision, every budget request, every whispered conversation about how close they'd come to losing everything, not to a breach or a hacker or a market crash, but because they'd failed to understand the value of the quiet woman in the corner who never asked for praise. Just resources. Just respect. When she didn't get either, she walked. Not to hurt them, just because she could. Back on her porch, Karen sipped her tea and watched the clouds shift like slow-moving ghosts. She didn't win by fighting. She didn't need a courtroom or a confrontation. She let the truth collapse under its own weight and made sure they felt every ounce of it. Quiet, precise, and devastating. Because some people burn bridges. Karen, she built the whole damn thing, and then calmly took the blueprints with her when she left. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.